just surrender it all to Christ because I just got out of an amazing Bible study after spending 4 hours today in the Word with Christ. The Burning Heart contract kept reiterating, like today it reiterated for me on day 12 that we are called holy. And there, because our Creator is holy, not that we have to be holy, but we must be holy. We must be holy because our Creator is holy, and that is why we must set ourselves aside and apart and strive for that perfection that He is. And that's why we're going to go into Leviticus again and why He was asking for perfected offerings. Leviticus 22:17 through 23:30 or 23:40. Oh my goodness, Leviticus 22:17 through 23:44. He was saying that like if a bull or lamb, if a bull is defective or a lamb or whatever, it can be like the defective things can be offered as a burnt offering, but he is asking for perfection from us and the foreigners that live among us. It's willing and acceptable to the Lord. He must not. He's talking about how he wants just perfection, and it reminded me of Cain and Abel's thing whenever they were early on in the Bible, because Abel would just give to God the best of the best because he was so joyous in his giving, and we are also called to be joyous givers as well, not just because of who we are or what we have. It doesn't matter what we have. If we give joyously, and embellishingly, just give because you have. And those that have not, that's okay too. Like if we give from what we can is a thing. We're not called to give like whatever. It doesn't matter. But either way, remind me of Cain and Abel's thing, because eat the entire. When you bring a Thanksgiving offering to, where is it? When you bring it in verse 29, when you bring a Thanksgiving offering to the Lord, sacrifice it properly, so it will be accepted. And I feel like that parallels with our lives today. We must sacrifice our flesh in order to come to Him. We must sacrifice ourselves. We no longer, because He rescued us from that old life, from the traumas and turmoil, from people trying to murder us, from people trying to abuse and assault us. He rescued us from that. Even though it looks like we may still live there, that's okay. If we set ourselves aside in obedience as a sacrifice and make within ourselves a pure and holy sacrifice, because He has been pure and holy, it is a reciprocal relationship. And I'm seeing things today as I've never seen them before. Because 33, it was I who rescued you from the land of Egypt, that I might be your God. He paid it forward. And it talks about how worship involves both celebration and confession. So like it's our whole lives are just an act of worship. Every breath is an act of worship, and celebration is what God is wanting from us, because He calls us to be close to Him. And I used to have this. I'm getting it now. I'm feeling it again today, and that's why I'm so on fire about this, because it just takes an act of obedience, which is better than sacrifice. He is calling us these things. And we talk about how like the priest will lift up the lamb from the offerings. He wants perfect offerings because He gave His pure and unblemished sacrifice for us of Jesus, that we ourselves are now pure and unblemished. So if we just live for Him, He will just reciprocate. And that's how like the earth works, I guess, or humanity. I'm not sure. This Bible study that I got out of was just so amazing. Like the women I love, and like the entirety of the meeting was more or less just an act of worship too, because we had like a regulated thing, but we followed like one question, I want to say, and then we just got on fire together and the communion and worship of Jesus, and it was such a beautiful thing. And that's why I'm okay with like having to do this like literally 3 hours of my life, because I want this to get across. Anyway, it talks about like how you, it doesn't matter. Mark 9:30, 10 through 12. Mark 9:30 through 10:12. Jesus didn't want anyone knowing that He was there, because the Roman Empire was slaughtering Christians at the time. And then they also thought that Jesus was trying to overthrow them. They were in the spirit of competition. They were in the spirit of fear and control. they were in the wrong spirit, and Jesus was here to put our spirits correct, to expand our minds in order to think correctly, in order to be a free will, in order to be a free giving for other people, because we are meant for so much more. And only God can explain that to us, and only if we just listen, He can show us how. And He was talking about how He was going to be slaughtered Himself, and He's going to rise again for 3 days. Verse 32, they didn't understand what He was saying, however, and they were too afraid to ask Him what He meant. And I want to bring my team into this, because my team is always thanking me for asking these questions, even though I sound stupid, even though I may look like I come across as an idiot, because I ask the dumb questions, because I've had my pride stripped from me after the horrible wreck, after like having faced death and all that stuff, after coming back from it, after like I was, okay, it doesn't matter, because I used to be mute before the wreck. Like I was angry and I was mute. I didn't want to speak to people. I thought that they ought to know, they ought to read my mind for whatever reason. And now that I'm out of the wreck, on the other side of it, I'm like, okay, well, I'm here. I got my voice. I'm going to ask. And we're going to find out. I feel like I know that asking actually invites more intimacy in relationships. Asking questions and boundaries are like the deepest forms of intimacy that we can have as human beings. And that was where they were holding themselves back, is what I feel, and like how sad. But either way, they were still His disciples. And Jesus, or they ended up, He asked them in verse 33 what they were discussing on the road, which was who was the best disciple ever. And Jesus was like, yep. Because they didn't want to tell Him. He sat down and called the 12 disciples and said, whoever wants to be the first must take the last place. We are called to a life of service for other people, to share this amazing word, to share this amazing awakening that we have together, because we are in this world together. And whenever they even said in verse 38, He was saying, whoever welcomes me welcomes not only me, but also my Father who sent me. Verse 38, Jesus sat down, teacher, what we saw someone use your name to cast out demons, told us to stop, because we have our own pride. And Jesus was like, don't do that, because if He is using my name, He knows the power of it. It doesn't matter who they are. If they know the power, then they can't be an enemy, because they are obviously they're just on their way to following, just on a different path is all. And then in verse 49, for everyone will be tested with fire. Verse 50, salt is good for seasoning, but if it loses its flavor, how do you make it salty again? As somebody that's lost their flavor several times over. And I never thought that I would get it back. I am tasting it right now. It is through obedience and through the loosening of myself, through putting my flesh on the cross with Christ, as I knew that He had already done for me. It is through getting out of my own head and taking my flesh and giving it to Christ, living only for Christ and like solely for Christ is how I did it. But then you must have these qualities of salt among yourselves and live in peace with each other. That means we are meant to be individuals. We are meant to have our spiciness or whatever it is. We are meant to have those urges and stuff. But until we can control them and put them on the cross with Christ, we have no control ourselves. So, hashtag be salty. And Corey just questioning them, blah, blah, blah. My thing is, if with sacrifice and obedience, it's not a call to be limiting. It's not a call to limit or discourage or dishonor ourselves. What if we looked at sacrificing ourselves and obedience as an actual call to greatness with Christ? Because He just wants to see with His fires to purify ourselves and get our minds correct in order to show us how much better and more promising His ways are, so that we can all do this together. All right, here it is. Who else could you invite to join you in ambitiously serving others and obeying Christ's commands? The servant of everyone else. Wait, what? Who could you invite to join you in ambitiously serving others and obeying Jesus' command to be the servant of everyone else in Mark 9:35? And